Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your top stories. Oil rebounds with US and European futures sliding as optimism around a potential de-escalation in the Middle East gives way to renewed caution. Iran denies direct talks with the United States. This after President Trump said productive conversation had been held with Tehran. Plus, the European Union and Australia agreed to a free trade deal nearly a decade in the making. The two sides looking to boost ties in the wake of rising tariffs from the United States. So let's take a look at these markets then, because it would seem there's quite the amount of skepticism in the markets after at one point yesterday we thought maybe the war was even over, or at least looked like it might be headed in that direction. As you can see, crude oil is rebounding today, but we're still at about $103 a barrel. We came off substantially yesterday in one fell swoop after the president made some comments about how he was in talks with Iran. There was de-escalation. He even later in the day made some granular comments that Tehran had agreed to hand over nuclear material and so on. But the market is not quite so sure after Iran came out and denied that talks were actually happening. And then we have sources telling us that Pakistan is trying to mediate. So how much is President Trump in earnest? How much is he misdirecting? How much of all of this is for public consumption? John, authors of Bloomberg Opinion saying, look, the markets could end up deciding when this war ends. After all, it decided when the Ukraine war was over, even though that war is still ongoing. For now, though, the dollar index is bid once again, so we're back to that trade. And if we take a look at futures, they are lower. Asia stocks having paired gains throughout the session. Gold once again lower as well. Just for context, though, we're right back to where we were last Friday morning for the Nasdaq 100, so not a huge move in the end. And for oil, we're where we were earlier last week. Your other risk events then on the horizon. At 9 a.m. UK time, we get European PMIs, looking to be a little bit softer there. At 1 p.m, the Hungarian Central Bank makes its decision. And at 1:45, we get US PMIs. The fragile optimism around a potential de-escalation in the Iran war appears to be fading. Let's see how Asian markets are faring with Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Winnie.
Yeah, morning, Bonnie. As you can see, that the momentum in Asia really fading quite quickly after the early rally in the session. You can see MXAP here up just 1.4%, but coming off a 1.7 increase earlier this morning, intraday high there. But we are nowhere close to erasing that 3.4 decline just yesterday. Now, we're hearing from investors that they are really unconvinced that this is getting us anywhere close to an effective de-escalation of the situation, especially with the denial from Iran, and also Israel still continuously attacking some of these facilities. However, now you flip the board and see how the broader assets are reacting to that as well. What's driving those gains, Pare in Asia, coming back of, as you mentioned, the rise in oil as well as the increase in the strengthening of the dollar as well. That is now pushing the gold down further for a 10th session. And a stronger dollar is also affecting the FX market here in Asia, with the Japanese yen weakening just 0.1% there. We also had the CPI number coming at its slowest growth in about 4 years. And it's also weaker than expected because of these utility subsidies from the government. But overall, quite some weakness in the currency space as well. Last but not least, we're looking at the yields as well. 40-year yield down about 2 basis points following that global bond rally, but also with the JGB auction coming through quite smoothly, with demand quite solid as well. Back to you, Bonnie.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su there in Hong Kong. Iran's deputy parliamentary speaker and state media have denied any negotiations with the United States are taking place, calling President Trump's claim psychological warfare. It comes after Trump told reporters the U.S. would delay strikes against Iran's energy infrastructure after what he called productive conversations with the country.
I think there's a very good chance we're going to end up in a deal, and so we're giving it 5 days, and then we're going to see where that takes us. And I would say at the end of this period, I think it could very well end up being a very good deal for everybody, as good as if we went all the way and just literally annihilated the place, which if we don't have to do that, that would be a good thing.
Let's bring in Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jumana Bercetci. Jumana, what do we know about the state of these negotiations, if indeed they're even ongoing?
That's right. So a flurry of headlines coming through, the source being the President Trump himself, indicating that productive discussions had been taking place with the Iranians, and also that he had instructed the Department of Defense to push back any potential strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure by 5 days. So a 5-day window, which coincides with the end of the market trading week, which is what some observers have commented. Now, Iran were quick to respond. Iranian media and even the Speaker of the Parliament himself put up posts subsequently throughout the day, suggesting that no direct negotiations have been taking place. However, what does seem to be apparent is that there are indirect mediation attempts that are being put through by many of the Gulf Arab states. And some of the names that have been circulated include the likes of Pakistan, Egypt, Oman, alongside other Gulf states in the region as well, who have been trying to bring down some of the temperature in the region. And from what we understand, also the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi did have a call with his Egyptian counterpart this morning. Now, whether this is going to yield to anything is a big question. Clearly, they're trying to reignite the diplomatic channel. But I just want to remind viewers that the war is not over. It is day 25. There are ongoing strikes, ongoing joint U.S.-Israeli operations over Iran, over central Tehran this morning. In response, Iran has continued to strike back. Kuwait City reported sirens this morning, Bahrain as well, more projectiles being intercepted over Saudi Arabia, and also hearing of missiles being directed towards Tel Aviv and Israel. This at the same time as new reporting is emerging, and this is from the New York Times, suggesting that the Pentagon are also weighing sending airborne troops to the region as well, around 3,000 of them, and they could be deployed in the next 18 hours, alongside the ground troops of about 2,500 that are already on their way to the region. So no signs really that this war is over, but the signaling from President Trump is at least they've tried to re-engage on the diplomatic channels once again.
Yeah, so many conflicting signals. Jumana, on that note, what do we understand is the current position of Gulf states vis-a-vis this war?
Well, I will tell you that when that ultimatum came through from President Trump on Saturday evening, the region was on high alert about the potential reprisal from Iran to some of the key infrastructure, power plants in the region, desalination plants. We've spoken about the importance of that infrastructure for the region as a whole. From our own reporting, and this is our BN colleagues, we understand that many of them were speaking to President Trump about holding back from striking on specifically Iranian civil infrastructure so as to thwart the possibility of them subsequently retaliating against Gulf infrastructure. Now, at the same time, the language from many of these Gulf states has hardened over the last couple of days. You don't need to look so far. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Minister of Foreign Affairs only last week said, our patience is not unlimited. 2 days ago, they kicked out the military attaché, the Iranian military attaché, and deemed them to be person non grata. We also understand from our own reporting as well that it would have been one red line too far should Iran have targeted civilian infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, and possibly on the back of that, they would have considered perhaps joining the operations militarily. And over here in the UAE, again, more signals coming through from key diplomatic advisors to the President, Dr. Gargash, saying that this is no longer about an Iranian ceasefire. This is about security in the region. We heard yesterday from one of the most influential energy leaders in the world, the CEO of ADNOC, Sultan Al-Jaber, who also said that Iran are weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz and that this is akin to economic terror. So the language, the rhetoric is certainly hardening. No indication yet that they're willing to join in militarily in the conflict, though, again, overnight some reporting suggesting that maybe Saudi Arabia are open to allowing the U.S. use their airbase to conduct strikes. But at this point, very strong language. But the main concern here in the region is that real risk of reprisals, particularly as it pertains to power plants and to key infrastructure.
All right, Bloomberg's Jumana Bercetci, thank you so much in Dubai. Oil gaining again after falling steeply on Monday. A barrel of Brent crude heading back towards $104 a barrel now after that 11% plunge following President Trump's comments. The concern now is that other countries will be drawn into the war with Iran. Let's bring in Anthony De Paula, Bloomberg's Middle East energy markets reporter in Dubai. Anthony, markets still very sensitive to every headline, and of course, even if there's de-escalation, there's still, a bunging up in the Strait of Hormuz, right? What does it all mean for the prompt future of oil prices?
Good morning, Vani. Yeah, I think the key thing is what Jumana had just said there, which is that the war is not over yet. And although we have these good signs, which really led to a big sell-off yesterday, something like 10% dropping, Brent crude dropping below $100 a barrel, which is a big sell-off on the back of those initial comments from U.S. President Donald Trump. There was some added speculation with the Iranian denials, which could well be posturing on both sides as they jockey for a deal, and neither one wants to look like they've been the ones who are suing for peace, who have been beaten in this case. So it could be some jockeying there. But we did also see that reporting this morning, potentially, that the Gulf countries were looking at taking a more aggressive stance. And that Gulf language has gotten stronger because the Gulf countries don't want to be in the situation where there is kind of an interim agreement and they are left with a more emboldened Iran. We do still have the Strait of Hormuz closed. That comes as Iran is using not very high-tech weaponry to close that Strait of Hormuz while it's under attack from two of the most advanced militaries in the world. So that does create an added risk. And I think what the oil price is looking at is the possibility of that closure being protracted, staying for longer. We even had Goldman Sachs commenting also on television about how a longer closure of Hormuz would lead to even higher prices down the road. So markets are really attuned to that, attuned to the issue as well of the infrastructure inside the Gulf. We've seen a lot of attacks already on key oil facilities, gas facilities, refineries. Some of those damaged, Qatar talking about several months to repair their LNG facilities that will affect supplies for years. So the longer that this takes, the more attacks there are on critical infrastructure, the longer then oil takes to recover and global economies take to recover. So we really do need to see a resolution. And as the ADNOC CEO was saying yesterday, the only real resolution is to get Hormuz opened. ADNOC's CEO was speaking to the CERAWeek conference in Houston, a huge gathering of all kinds of oil executives. And that was the main topic of the conference yesterday. What's happening with Iran? When's Hormuz going to be reopened? And when are we going to get that supply back to market? Vani.
Anthony, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Anthony De Paula there. Equity index futures on both sides of the Atlantic falling on renewed caution. We're joined now by Mark Cudmore, Bloomberg's executive editor for Markets Live. Boy, what a 24 hours since we last spoke, Mark. What will the market want to hear to believe that there's actual real de-escalation happening and that perhaps that Strait of Hormuz will start to reopen and oil will become more plentiful again?
As you've outlined, Vani, the only thing that matters is when the strait reopens to a large degree. There's no sign of that. And I guess what we need is an Iranian off-ramp. I have not heard a single person articulate any coherent reason for why Iran would let the strait open anytime, on an immediate basis. I think, I'm not a geopolitical expert, but why would they let it open when they've just been handed so much power that they didn't know they had a month ago? Up until a month ago, they threatened that they'd close the strait, but everyone thought the US could keep it open. Well, it turns out Iran can keep it closed. So right now, Iran have the upper hand, and I'm not seeing what they're getting offered to kind of get that off-ramp. So therefore, I think that unfortunately things are likely to get much worse before they get better. So, I remain very bearish stocks. We've discussed about this has been a very, very tough month for global stock markets, the worst in 3.5 years with a lot of volatility. Unfortunately, the next week or two, I can only assume it's going to get worse is the base assumption. I reiterate that I'm not a geopolitical expert. I don't have any inside loop on the conflict, but there seems to be no logic to have a base case assumption of a positive view. The only reason to have that is because of what Trump said yesterday. But Trump has said, 10 different things in the last few days. So to put weight selectively on the one that sounds most positive doesn't seem entirely logical to me when he's not the only protagonist. There are three protagonists, really, and neither Israel or Iran have shown any inclination to kind of stop the conflict. So I think for the moment, the base case assumption is it's going to stay closed, and it's going to get much worse for stock markets because equity investors are still complacent about the risks.
Yeah, and that war on trade, if you like, so oil higher, gold lower, Bitcoin lower, that's all still in place. Dollar higher, right, with the dollar index up 0.4% today once again. Mark Cudmore, thank you so much. Mark Cudmore is Bloomberg's executive editor for Markets Live. Still ahead, from Italian wine to Indian films, how the Iran war is being felt by industries across the world. But first, the European Union and Australia seal a trade deal in defiance of US tariffs. More on that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to some corporate news. Apollo Global Management is curbing redemptions from one of its largest non-traded private credit funds for retail investors, becoming the latest alternative asset manager to grapple with a surge in such requests. Redemptions from the Apollo Debt Solutions Fund will be capped at 5% of outstanding shares. Staying with the sector, a private credit fund jointly run by KKR and Future Standard has lost one of its investment-grade ratings, a rare occurrence in the $1.8 trillion private credit market that could result in higher borrowing costs for the investment vehicle. Moody's lowered its assessment of the $14 billion FS KKR Capital Fund to BA1, or one level into junk, because of what it described as continued asset quality challenges. European car sales rose last month as drivers took advantage of new subsidy programs to switch to electric models. New vehicle registrations were up 1.7% in February from a year earlier. Sales in France fell 15%, but that was offset by growth in Germany, Spain, Italy and the UK. Estée Lauder shares fell in New York after it announced talks to buy Spain's Puig brands in a deal that would create a beauty giant with about $20 billion in annual sales. The company's declined to offer details on the terms. The move would add brands such as Byredo and Charlotte Tilbury to Estée Lauder's portfolio, helping it compete against L'Oreal. Coming up, the European Union and Australia seal a trade deal in defiance of US tariffs. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. The European Union and Australia have agreed to a free trade deal after almost a decade of talks as the two sides push to deepen ties. The EU Commission President hailed the agreement, making a thinly veiled swipe at both the US and at China.
Today we are telling an important story to a world that is deeply changing. A world where great powers are using tariffs as a leverage and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. In our story, open, rules-based trade delivers positive sum outcomes. Trust matters more than transactions.
The two sides also signed a new security and defence partnership to better facilitate cooperation on crises and security challenges.
It will bolster our collaboration on defence industry, maritime security, cyber security, countering terrorism and combating hybrid threats such as disinformation. And it shows our shared commitment to global peace and security, including reaffirming our steadfast support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's illegal full-scale invasion.
Let's bring in Oliver Crook, Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent. So, Ollie, tell us more about what's actually in the deal. Where does it proceed from here?
Yeah, so there's still the procedural factors. It still needs to get through the European Council, all of the leaders of Europe. It needs to get both through the European Parliament and the Australian Parliament. But this is really the sort of handshake top level of this free trade agreement that, as you've just been mentioning, has been being worked out for about 10 years. There were a lot of stumbling blocks, particularly on the question of meat imports into the European Union. We understand this was one of the big sticking points, and we understand that they managed to get through that. So from the Australian side, what they will be touting, what they will say they've gained is access to the European market for a number of agricultural goods, specifically on beef, sheep meat, for example. They will be granted some access with some quotas that will be phased in over time. There will be tariffs will be dropped on a number of vegetable goods coming into the European Union, in addition to nuts and things like that the Australians have produced in abundance, and also on dairy products. About 87% of those will have no tariffs going into the European Union. On the other side, the Europeans will be touting, and the biggest exports right now the European Union has to the Australia are as machinery, transport goods, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, those sorts of things. A lot of those goods face tariffs of up to 5%. That will come down to 0%. So for Ursula von der Leyen, for the Australians, dealing with this new sort of reality of the Trump administration, of this sort of disintegration of the multilateral trading order, this is yet another sort of example of where they can continue to build that. For the European Union, this will be the third free trade agreement that has been signed over the last couple of months. You'll remember Mercosur with Latin America. That was 25 years in the making. That got over the line just the last couple of months. And with India. And the Europeans will say, listen, we've cut all of these deals across the world. We now have access to markets worth $2 billion with 2 billion additional people that we didn't have 6 months ago. And that will be their response to the sort of Trump view of trade across the world.
Well, speaking of which, the EU-US deal has still not been ratified. That's due to go before the European Parliament this week. What's the outlook for that?
Yeah, I mean, and that is something that has obviously been very frustrating for the American administration. This is an agreement that they had come to at a handshake level back in July. There were a number of procedural factors in the European Union to get this over the line. But then you had the threats to Greenland and tariffs associated with that. That then put it on ice. Then there was the question of the SCOTUS basically cutting the foundational groundwork of IEPA for all of the tariff policy. So the Europeans said, listen, we're not sure if we can proceed with this. Now we're getting, hopefully on Thursday, according to the Europeans and according to the Americans, the European Parliament to vote on this. This is something that has been a very sort of large concern for namely the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, who I caught up with yesterday. Here's what he had to say in terms of his expectation of what we'll get this week from the Europeans.
But all the signs appear to be good. I think we'll have enough votes. Thank God we had enough votes to get it out of committee. I think there's been a lot of political delays in getting this approved, and really not approving this deal would be, it'd be economic malpractice. Now, some people are going to find that they have maybe a political advantage in their home country by trying to teach America a lesson, but you're really going to be teaching Europe a lesson. Economically, this is clearly in Europe's best interest, and I'm very hopeful it will get through the process.
So something the Trump administration really wants to tie a bow over and really move forward in terms of their trade deal with the Europeans.
All right, Ollie, thank you so much. Fantastic interview there. Oliver Crook, Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent. Let's take a look at these markets as we head into a new trading day in Europe and the United States to come. So Brent is now currently trading just below $103 a barrel. So it had that precipitous decline yesterday, right back up to 104 today, and now it's off those highs. That's obviously having an impact on futures. Futures are crawling ever higher. They're not at their lows of the session, but they are pointed lower, at least in the United States. And then if you look at the Asia-Pacific index, it is higher today by 1.7%, not quite at its highs of the session, but it is getting back there. So there's a lot of confusion, skepticism, maybe a little bit of hope in this market today. We'll obviously continue to keep you updated. Coming up, relief makes way for caution. We'll have that reaction to all the Middle East headlines next. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lonnie Quinn with your top stories. Oil rebounds with US and European futures sliding. This as optimism around a potential de-escalation in the Middle East gives way to renewed caution. Iran denies direct talks with the US after President Trump said productive discussions had been held with Tehran. Plus, the European Union and Australia agree to a free trade deal nearly a decade in the making. The two sides looking to boost ties in the wake of rising tariffs from the United States. So let's look at these markets then, trying to grapple with a volleys of headlines, and also trying to maybe interpret some of these headlines, right? So President Trump came out with the idea that there were going to be no energy infrastructure attacks for 5 days. It looked like the war was over at that point. The whole market just turned on its head. We saw a massive down spike in the VIX, for example. Now, throughout the day, Iran started denying some of the claims that President Trump had made. President Trump gave even more details, saying that Iran was willing to give up some nuclear materials and so on. So this market is really trying to decipher just what games are being played, if any, whether there are negotiations ongoing behind the scenes or whether some of this is for public consumption. That said, Brent crude is where we were round about the middle of last week at 103. WTI, a lot calmer, but we're still $30 off where we were before this war started. The dollar index is showing some strength, so that trade is back on. If we look at futures, we're certainly not at our lows of the level, but we are lower when it comes to European futures and S&P futures. The 10-year yield is back up 2 basis points to 4.37, and gold is lower once again. So it's back to that war-on trade, as I've been calling it. It's not exactly risk-on, risk-off. It's got elements of inflation concern in there. It's got elements of sell-off concerns, and there's some of the gold enthusiasm coming away as well. So we'll continue to watch for these headlines throughout the day. It could be another volatile one. Time now for your front page news, dominated, of course, by the Middle East. The Financial Times leading on Iran contradicting President Trump, saying there are no direct talks happening to end the war. The US president postponing possible attacks on energy infrastructure after hailing productive discussions with Tehran. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports on the back-channel diplomacy behind Trump's U-turn on Iran. The president saying that the paper, in fact, saying that the president backtracked on his threat to strike Iran's power plants after a series of closed-door discussions led by Middle Eastern intermediaries. And finally, the Telegraph splashes on Trump saying he will run the Strait of Hormuz with the new Ayatollah. The US president promising regime change in the Islamic Republic of Iran, saying the new leader will be exactly what we're looking for. And you can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DayBGo. Stocks in Asia then have paired some of those gains, particularly in South Korea, while equity futures on both sides of the Atlantic are pointing to a negative open. Sentiment is weakening after that Wall Street Journal report that Gulf countries may now be drawn into the war in Iran. Joining me now is Hetal Mehta, chief economist at St. James's Place. Hetal, how are we supposed to think of these days of volatile markets? Do markets eventually just give up on this war, as John Authors of Bloomberg Opinion has suggested, and move on? Or are there things in here that should make markets very concerned?
I guess it's fairly typical that markets can only focus on one thing at a time, but this is quite a big thing for markets to focus on. I think if we end up in a situation a bit like Russia, Ukraine, a kind of prolonged frozen conflict, markets do typically tend to move on, and certainly equity markets don't seem to have a long-lasting effect from these kind of geopolitical conflicts. But nevertheless, I mean, for the very short to medium term, there are big concerns around just the volatility of oil prices, and then if oil prices do stay elevated, even with a drop in the last day or so, we're still looking at oil prices more than like 30% up from where they were just 3 weeks ago, and that is going to feed through into many other aspects of daily life, and see clearly inflation, growth impacts, etc.
What's most concerning to you when it comes to the oil price? Is it that central banks won't have a way of dealing with it, or is it that, it's just going to cause inflation, and even if that inflation is short term, that's really going to hurt the consumer?
Yeah, I think central banks always struggle with these supply shocks. The textbook prescription is look through them, there's not much that higher interest rates today can do about oil prices, tomorrow or even next week. But yet they do have to signal their commitment to inflation. Their credibility is incredibly important. And that's why inflation expectations are going to be one of the key drivers of what happens, and wages. So central banks have been a little bit scarred by what happened in 2022. Clearly, the moves we've seen so far, particularly in gas, aren't of that magnitude. But that's something that's going to be very important for central banks to watch. And we saw last week all four of the major central banks decided to keep policy unchanged, just awaiting more information. Just earlier this year, the Bank of England was priced to cut. There was very little doubt in most people's mind that would happen. And now even, those who are much more cautious about the economy wanted to wait and see. I think it's also worth remembering that inflation shocks may be inflationary in the near term, but further out they tend to be disinflationary, and that's something that central banks will be careful about. They need to signal their commitment to inflation. They also don't want to have the long-lasting impact or negative impact that might have on GDP.
Well, to that point, can I play you some sound from Stephen Myron, Fed Governing Council member, to the effect, basically, that it's too early to alter our position? Just have a listen.
We've already had some whiplash this morning, and I think that underlines that we shouldn't be making policy based on short-term headlines, right? We should wait for all the information to come in before really changing our outlook. And I think it's just still premature to have a clear view about what this is going to look like as you look 12 months out.
So you can be sympathetic to that view, Hetal, but at some point, is it too late for the Fed to move if there is indeed some kind of a real concern for the economy?
So I think it would be, where before this crisis started, the Fed was priced to cut twice. There are already some concerns about the economy actually running at a decent, healthy pace and it not needing cuts. And so the fact that we may just be looking at no change whilst the Fed waits, I don't think is too much of an issue. I think with rate hikes, again, credibility is key. So if they did feel the need to hike, and for me, I think that would have to be in a much more severe stress situation, and oil prices much higher than they are now. It would also then probably be a relatively quick reversal too.
Yeah, a European Central Bank Governing Council member, Boris Vucic, was also speaking this morning, and he's saying the central bank has to be very agile and vigilant because there's a risk of stagflation. Hetal, what should we be more concerned about? Imminent inflation, a longer-term stagflationary environment, and demand destruction, quite frankly?
I think it really depends from country to country. So we saw all of the central banks do the same thing last week, i.e. no change, but they all face these different circumstances. So for the US, where savings have largely been run down, it may be that the impact is actually inflationary in the short term, but there isn't that buffer. And so then you get the demand destruction come through a bit faster. In contrast, the UK has a huge buffer of savings and households have that. But then our labour market has been deteriorating a bit more faster than that of the US. So it really will depend on country to country. I'd say that we're unlikely to see a uniform impact.
All right, Hetal, thank you so much for the context today. Hetal Mehta is Chief Economist at St. James's Place. Top U.S. gas producer EQT says expanding pipeline infrastructure is essential to address rising energy prices. Speaking to Bloomberg at Sarah Week in Houston, CEO Toby Rice discussed where things stand with the Trump administration.
It's all about affordability. It's all about reliability. It's about transforming our energy independence into energy dominance. And what energy dominance means, that means America is prepared to win the AI race. That means America is prepared to provide energy security to our allies, where their energy security around the world has been crippled from what Russia has done to what's happening right now in Iran. And so this is a really critical time. It's never been more important time for us to produce energy in this country than right now. It's also never been more difficult. And a lot of the conversations that we're having in D.C. is about fixing that last part. And to make it easier for us to get energy built in this country, we need to get serious about permit reform. And that needs to be a focus in D.C. to enable the greatest industry in the world, American energy industry, to do what we do. And that's keep energy cost effective, reliable, and clean.
You know, you touched on affordability. It's something we're hearing a lot about right now. How about electricity bills? What are your conversations like with the administration about that?
That has been a big catalyst as American energy bills are up over 35% since 2020. What's important for Americans to know is your energy bills were going up before Iran. They were going up before AI and people started talking about these data centers. This is something that has really started in 2020 and bills are up. And that's across the board. But specifically on electricity is really a catalyst that everybody's looking at right now. And when we diagnose this issue to solve this issue of lowering electricity prices, it's very simple. The reason why we find ourselves in this situation is because we've blocked, canceled, and imposed many pipelines that the market forces have said are critical and needed. And those pipelines have been blocked and shut down. Demand has not stopped. Demand has continued to grow. And when you have lower supply, demand high, that's when prices go. And New England is a poster child of where this has gone badly. But the solution is very simple. Build more pipeline infrastructure, bring our low-cost energy resource, natural gas, to the doorstep of New England, and electricity prices will drop significantly.
While you think there should be more pipelines, in the meantime, while there isn't, what's the solution?
The solution is they're going to do everything they can to keep the lights on. And let's look at what happened in Winter Storm Fern. New England was burning 40% of their electricity was coming from oil, burning trash. This is the type of desperation moves where they saw their energy bills during this winter period. Natural gas prices spiked to almost $150 an MCF. And what's remarkable about this is we were selling gas next door for a price of $6. So people need to understand that these energy issues are completely self-inflicted. They're completely corrected. And we have the solution here domestically.
EQT CEO Toby Rice speaking to us from CERAWeek. Coming up, how the Iran war is being felt by industries across the world, from Bollywood film producers to farmers in Italy. That story next. This is Bloomberg. The world has been transfixed by the surging price of crude oil since the conflict in Iran began. But as the war prolongs, the pain for consumers will ultimately be what crude is turned into during refining, including fertilizer, and the impact on the food industry. Joining me now to discuss all the problems that are potentially ahead, Bloomberg oil products reporter Jack Whittles and EMEA grains reporter Eleanor Thornburn. Jack, let me start with you. What kind of impact are we going to see for crude-based products?
So there's already been a huge impact for crude-based petroleum products. Some of those, I'm thinking especially diesel and jet fuel, they've been rising more and faster than the price of crude oil. I would say there are three fundamental reasons why petroleum products are going up so much. One, they're of course made from crude oil, so when the price of crude oil goes up, the petroleum products made from them also go up. Two, there's something like 5 million barrels a day of petroleum products that go through the Strait of Hormuz. That's almost completely blocked, so that's really crimping supply. And three, because so little crude oil is coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, some oil refiners, especially in parts of Asia, are having to cut how much crude oil they process, and so there's making less petroleum products, and that's further crimping supply of those fuels.
Unbelievable. Eleanor, how is the conflict, everything Jack just said and more, impacting everyone from farmers to growers to packaging firms, distributors even?
Well, essentially, Bonnie, it's because there is no modern global agriculture without energy. It powers everything from farm machinery, irrigation, tractors, trucks that food is transported around in. And on top of that, it also goes into producing these key inputs like fertilizer, like the plastic packaging that we're so used to seeing in our supermarkets. And essentially, the war in Iran is squeezing the supplies of all of these very key inputs. I mean, there's a reason why when oil spikes, food inflation tends to follow. It's because the two have a very close relationship. And so, yes, with the Strait of Hormuz closed as well, you've got the shipping slowing down. So these key inputs, like fertilizer and actually to some extent the food, the grains that's on these ships, they're all stuck. They're not getting to where they're meant to be.
And as terrifying as it is to ask, Eleanor, what kind of implications could this have on food security and living standards?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of all starts with the farmers who are already facing quite a grim outlook. They're dealing with higher input costs, more extreme swings in weather. But now, essentially, they're going to be making even more difficult decisions, basically on our behalf. They can do essentially one of two things. They can either cut back on inputs like fertilizer, which would over time see them grow less because their yields would be lower. And as you can imagine, if that happened at scale, the chances of a global food supply shortage become much greater. Or they could pass on all of these higher costs to us, the consumer. So it's not a direct handover, but essentially we would be fitting the bill. I mean, food inflation doesn't happen overnight, but it is possible that in 6 to 12 months' time, when we're browsing supermarket shelves, we find that our go-to products either aren't there or they've just suddenly gotten way more expensive.
Yeah. Well, speaking of more expensive, Jack, gasoline at the pump in the US close to $4 a gallon now, and that's tended to be a place where, you know, politicians start taking notice, right? And it could be almost self-correcting. Is there any chance of that?
Yes, I totally agree. I think the gasoline price at the pump in the US is probably the single biggest factor for my money that would influence Donald Trump's decision-making when it comes to this war. It certainly influences decisions made in the White House. I would also draw your attention, though, to some of the other petroleum products, especially the price of jet fuel in Europe, for instance. That was recently about $220 a barrel, which is a staggering price. We've already, you know, and that is sort of crisis level prices.
Crisis level, and doesn't just affect tourism, but also freight carriers, importers, exporters, right? A lot of things travel on planes and need jet fuel. Eleanor, winter crops across Europe about to start sprouting again, I guess. We're coming into spring, or we hope we are. What are supplies looking like? Is there a possibility that the food basket could be greater this year and maybe help out in some way?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to tell at this stage. I mean, at least in Europe, the winter crop seems to have emerged quite well. I mean, from what I've understood from economists, they've kept onto their moisture, which is a key thing. But yeah, I mean, as I say, it's more with the conflict in Iran about the inputs rather than the crops itself. I mean, not much food is grown in the Persian Gulf, given that it's, you know, it's mostly sand. You don't really picture, you know, swimming fields of wheat. But yeah, it's difficult to say. For now, Europe, the crops look okay. So it just depends really on how long this goes on for.
Jack, the Gulf region has cut off sources of energy and fertiliser. They're key to things like grains and vegetables. As Eleanor said, you can't do anything without fuel, right? If the Gulf can't get all of the production facilities that have been shut down or almost shut down up and running quickly, are there knock-on effects no matter whether this war ends or not?
Yes, certainly. Some of the refining infrastructure has been damaged in the region, so even if the Strait of Hormuz was to open this moment, you would certainly see knock-on effects. So you would be talking about higher prices, and that would feed through to wider inflation across the economy, I think.
Just want to point out that the UN World Food Programme warning that a prolonged conflict could lead to literally record levels of global hunger. So we hope that won't happen, but we'll be following your stories. Bloomberg Oil Products reporter Jack Whittles and EMEA Grains reporter Eleanor Thornburn. Thank you. Now to some other top stories we're following this morning. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says the country has sufficient energy supplies to meet domestic demand. He spoke as a gas shortage hits industries from restaurants to fertilizer makers and oil refiners. Modi says India holds more than 5 million metric tons of strategic oil reserves and is helping ensure safe transit for Indian vessels stranded in the Middle East. New York's Laguardia airport has reopened with reduced capacity. This after that Air Canada Express plane collided with a fire truck on a runway late Sunday night, killing 2 pilots. Recordings reveal an air traffic controller ordering the truck to stop just before the impact with the plane, which was travelling at more than 200 kilometres an hour. 76 people were aboard the aircraft, with more than 40 needing hospital treatment.
As our airports go, LaGuardia is a very well-staffed airport. We're a couple controllers short in total, but it is a well-staffed airport. Again, 33 certified controllers that operate out of the tower here at LaGuardia.
The people of Denmark are voting in a snap election that's shaping up to be a vote for stability after President Trump's threats over Greenland. The party of Prime Minister Mehta is ahead in the polls, buoyed by her handling of the diplomatic crisis earlier this year. She's hoping to capitalise on that rebound after her approval ratings hit a record low last year. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has conceded defeat in a national referendum to overhaul the judicial system. Almost 54% voted no to reforms in legal training and overseeing the careers of judges and prosecutors. The result is Meloni's biggest political setback since taking power in 2022 and comes ahead of a general election expected next year. Plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
It will take time to rebuild inventories of the right grades of crude, the right types of products around the world to meet demand. And then, of course, the other thing that is increasingly a concern is with production being shut in a number of fields and facilities, some of those facilities having suffered damage, in some cases reportedly pretty significant damage. How quickly that production can actually come back online.
The situation in Iran is showcasing the value of American energy independence when it comes to natural gas. Where we saw international prices rise over $10 an MCF, natural gas prices here domestically only rose 10 cents.
These pressures on international energy prices are all going to drive people to North America.
Energy diversification allows Greece not to suffer the same way the increase of prices, because we have 55% of electricity coming from solar, wind and hydro.
Some of the highlights there from day one of a CERAWeek in Houston, dominated, of course, by the war in Iran, and we'll have more from CERAWeek throughout today. Let's take a look at some charts. This pertains to what we were just talking about, refining margins at their highest level since the Ukraine war, in fact, and only likely to get even higher. And it's difficult for farmers, for people who need to buy food, for grain producers. And to that point, let's take a look at the next chart, because grain prices are also seeing huge input costs getting even huger and getting really pressurized by that. Fertilizer prices soaring, as well as what we just heard earlier, those refined products that are needed to power machinery and so on. So this is getting to be a very difficult situation, and the UN World Food Programme saying that if it continues indefinitely, you could see record levels of hunger. Risk events today then at 9 a.m. UK time, we get European PMIs. 1 p.m. we get the Hungarian Central Bank decision. Rates unexpected to change. And then at 1:45 p.m. UK time, we get the US PMIs for March, so fresh data. Coming up on The Pulse, we're going to have an exclusive conversation with the Telecom Italia CEO following that takeover bid by Posta Italiana. That's at 9:15 a.m. London time. You don't want to miss that interview. Do stay with us now, though, because the opening trade is coming up right now. This is Bloomberg.